In this video, we're going to go over the last three queries that were part of the question 2, part 2A query logic. These queries are the two simple queries that are then used to create the subquery logic that we did when we computed the weighted average price per item ordered. So to begin this, we're going to start with this query. If you wanted to create a query that displays each sales order ID and the total of each order, we've done this a couple of times in the sales table, but now we're going to do it for orders. So let's take a look at the next slide, and you'll see this picture that I keep discussing with you and that we keep talking about in class of how the tables are linked together. So if we need a total of each order and a list of the order IDs, your inclination might be to go to the orders table, but none of the pricing information or to get the total order is in the orders table. So your next inclination might be to go to the sales lines tables, but remember, the sales lines table is about orders that have already shipped that are truly sales. So we're going to take a look in this order lines table to build this query. So let's jump over to Access and create a new query with our query design. And let's pull down this order lines table and close this out. And so all it asks for in this query is to create a list of order IDs and the total for each order. So it's pretty easy. It's pretty basic for things that we've been doing. So we're going to take the order IDs. Sorry, I forgot to hit the totals button. Here we go. And I want it to group by order ID. And then I'm going to want it to sum the total for each order. But I'm going to create this using the builder like we do in class. But remember, you can just as easily just type your expression down into that if you know how to do the syntax. So let's open this order lines table, and we're going to just do price times quantity ordered. That's all we need. So we're going to create this price times quantity ordered. Remember, there's no net in the orders table because there's no discount, so we can only do gross. So here we are with our gross orders, and we're going to call this order total. And then, as I said earlier, if we run this now, we're just going to have a list of order IDs and order totals. Well, this is just a list of each individual order line off of the sales order. And as you can see, there's order ID 210 here 3 times. So what I need it to do is I need it to add these together so that I only have one unique order ID. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this group by and I'm going to ask it to sum it and run it again to make sure that I get just one of each one of these numbers. And you'll notice that there are 1,881 orders, which if I open my orders table is how many there would be. And this is formatted as currency, so I'm okay with the way that this looks. And this I'm going to save as order total per order ID. I'm going to save this query because I'm going to come back and I'm going to use it again in a minute. So let's go ahead and save that. And like I said, if you get lost as you're going through this, feel free to watch the video again and also look through your slides, which is going to have all the logic that I talk about in these videos and that we've discussed in class spelled out for you as you go through these queries. So let's work on this next one that we're going to use in a few minutes to build a query on a query. Let's find or make a query that displays each sales order ID and the total quantity of items ordered. In other words, how many different items are in the box when each order is shipped. So again, we're going to look and we're going to see that we could get this from the sales lines, but it's asked us about the orders. So when these shipped, how many items are going to be in the box when they ship. So we're going to need this quantity ordered field out of the order lines table again, and we're going to need the order ID. This is a very similar query to the one that we just did, but let's go ahead and create it. Query design, order lines table, close this up, hit our totals button so we know where our group bys end up. So we're going to group by order ID this time, but this time we don't need to create a built field or an expression. We just need to sum this quantity ordered. Basically, we're going to take the quantity from each line on this sales order, and we're just going to add each quantity together. So basically, we're just looking for a total of how many things are going to be in this box when this ships. So I'm going to rename this because it's going to call it some weird name if I don't give it an alias. So we're going to say total quantity per order. Total quantity per order. And then put a colon and give it an alias so that when I run it, I should have 1,881 records again, and I do. And then this tells me that this is the total quantity or the total number of things that's going to be in this box. Perfect. Exactly what I need. So I close this query. I'll save it as total quantity per order. Push OK. And then we'll go back and talk through this next one. The next one is one of the more difficult ones that we've talked about in class because what you want to do here is not what you actually should do. So this query says, display the list of each order number, so every order, followed by an average price per unit for each order. We've talked a little bit about the count function and the sum function and the average and all those different functions that you can do when you're building aggregate expressions. So your inclination might be to just use the average for this. If you do that and you create this query where you're just using the average function, and I'll show you this in the slides here. If I just create the average function, what it's doing is it's just taking the average without any regards to how many there are. So if there are 2 items worth $10, it's not taking into account that there's 2. So there's no weighted average. In business, we're much more interested in weighted averages than we are simple averages, and this is just a simple average. So this is not what we want. What we want is to take the total amount, the total dollar amount of the order, and divide it by the total number of things that are in there so we get a weighted average. So that's what we're going to do in Access. But in order to do that, we're going to use the 2 queries that we just built because Access is limited in what it can do in the same query. Is it possible to do it all in one query? Of course it is. But it is a very difficult syntax and somewhat overwhelming to create this query. So simpler just to use the 2 simple queries that we created. So if you go to the Create tab and you go to Query Design, up until now we've only used the tables here. But you can see we can also click on Queries. Now likely I have more queries than you do as I've been working through these videos, but hopefully you've worked all of them. But if you don't have this many, don't panic. It's just because I've been working on this for a while. So we know that we need this total quantity per order, and we need order total per order ID. Those are the 2 queries that we just made. Whatever you named them, you'll pull them out. And then you're going to have these 2 queries. So just like we do when we are joining tables, we're going to join these queries together on order ID, and that's going to tell Access, I want you to link these 2 because both of these tables contain information that I'm interested in about these order IDs. So I definitely want the order ID, and I want you to group by it. And I have the group by because I have the totals button up here. But I want you to group by it because what I really want is this weighted average. And then I'm going to click over here and I'm going to do something different. So instead of just creating this simple average like we talked about, I'm going to go to Builder and I'm going to use what I've already created. So instead of tables this time, I'll go to Queries. And I'm going to try to get the order total per order ID because I want this order total. And I'm going to divide that by the quantity. So total quantity per order in this field. So I'm going to divide my order total, so the gross total of everything on that sales order divided by the number of items that are going to be in that box. And I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to say this, I'm going to call my weighted average. And I am going to run this. But when I run this, it's going to be weird, right? Because it's going to be a whole list. And there's a couple things wrong with it, right? So one, it's not currency. So as you know, there are a couple of ways that we can figure out what we don't want to happen, right? We don't want it to look like that. So there's a couple ways that we can fix it so that it's not just all of these numbers. So how do we do that? Well, one way that we can do it is to have the coerce currency function, which I showed you in the last video. The other way that we can do that is we're going to go up to this property sheet and we're going to change this format to currency. So we do that, and then we come back over here, and that looks like what we wanted. So basically, we've created this weighted average, and the reason that the group by is going to work here for us is because we have told it to do this math for us. And so I hope that that makes sense, for the reason that we can't just perform a simple average. We have to do a weighted average by taking the total order and divided it by the number of items in the order instead of just the number of products, because we needed to take into account that quantity. So we can leave this by group by. We can call it an expression because we built something. That's my preference, is to not leave it by group by, because when I build expressions, I like to call them expressions so Access knows what I'm doing. Now, it didn't break it, but you can normally call it an expression for whatever reason. Access is not liking that, and I just want you guys to know in a video, like, it happens to me too, right? So let's read the error message when I change it to expression. What does it say? It says, your query does not include as part of an aggregate function. So it wants me to call it a group by, or wants me to call it a sum, or it wants me to call it an average. If I call it an average, it's going to take an average for me, doesn't change it, because an average is what I've computed. So you can call it average, you can call it group by. It's going to work in a variety of ways here. But the reason that it is working, and please remember this, the reason that it is working in a variety of ways is because I'm querying these two queries, which are very simple, and doing the math. So what I call it here isn't really going to change how Access recognizes it. So I hope that this was helpful, and I hope that you understand now why we've built these two queries instead of creating these multiple aggregate functions within Access. It works out nicely as they're queries that we already built, but there are other situations where you would need to create these aggregate functions, especially when you're trying to get a total sales invoice or a total order, and then do some other type of count or average with it. So bear that in mind as you're working through your project and studying for your assessment. If it says to make sure that you have the total by sales invoice and not sales line, or order ID and not order line, make sure that you realize that this is what it's talking about. It needs you to create a query to combine all of those orders together, because there is no distinct function in Access. And we'll talk about more when we get to Tableau, but just bear in mind, this is what these queries inside of queries are for. So we'll go ahead and save this as weighted average so that you'll have it for another day, weighted average. And hopefully this has been helpful. Please check out the other videos as you go through and study.